So I had a thing that I came across a couple days ago, and of course, you guys know that I'm not real concerned about the structure that's created in the Global Methodist Church. I'm much more concerned about the culture of the Global Methodist Church. And so I think a number of structures could work really well if we have the right culture established. But one of the main sticking points that people are concerned about is the episcopacy, which is, bishops in the United Methodist Church. Bishops just did so much harm because they were given authority and then they took authority and couldn't be checked because of the structure of the denomination. So a lot of people are wanting to structure things right now so that we can't have the same abuses in the Global Methodist Church. So I've largely been saying the structure isn't going to protect us. The culture, we need to have a culture of accountability, of rigor in the denomination, and I still stand by that. But even so, these questions of structure are not irrelevant. So with respect to the convening general conference that's going to be meeting next month, there are two different plans pertaining to episcopacy that are being presented. One by the TLC, which is the Transitional Leadership Committee or Commission. I forget if the C is what it stands for. But that's the dominant model that they've gone forward with. That's the model that these 9 Episcopal candidates have been selected for. And so that's going to be presented, but also Jay Therrell in Florida is presenting an alternative plan for the episcopacy. And so a lot of people have read through both plans, and one person was kind enough to actually do a compare and contrast right next to each other. So if you look at my screen, you'll have a column on the left for the TLC task force, a column on the right for the Florida plan, and you can see what the differences are. And you start to see these things really are different and why it would be that they would matter. So just going left to right, the TLC task force has at the top, the role of the bishop is mainly spiritual, a little temporal role of the conference superintendent is mainly temporal, a little spiritual. What I think that's saying is, okay, the bishop is itinerant, is a religious leader, is charismatic, interpersonal, but then you have conference superintendent. That's like the contemporary president pro tempore, and they're primary administrative. So both are administrative, both are spiritual, but they have two emphases. One is primarily spiritual, one is primarily administrative. With the Florida plan, now on the right, the role of the bishop is both spiritual and temporal. So yeah, it's using the word temporal where I used administrative. Temporal has to do with time. I think administrative is better. One is going to be doing a lot more paperwork, dotting I's, crossing T's. That would be the temporal administrative conference superintendent. That's in the TLC task force. In the Florida plan, I don't think there is a conference superintendent. I think there's just bishops. So this is like how we had in the United Methodist Church. The TLC task force bishops are over multiple annual conferences unless 2 or more conferences agree to share a conference superintendent, and there's a conference superintendent over each annual conference. So I don't think that's framed well. No matter what, the bishops are over multiple annual conferences. But then there's a question of, does each annual conference have its own conference superintendent? And the answer is that'll be the norm unless 2 conferences decide to share one, which they could. In the West, our conferences are tiny. We might need to share one. So in the Florida plan, the bishop is over each annual conference. So you have 1 bishop per annual conference, unless annual conferences mutually agree to share a bishop and there is no conference superintendent. So in the TLC plan, the bishop would be over 4, 5, or 6 annual conferences, itinerating around, doing evangelical work, staying in connection with the conference superintendent to properly administer the area, and collaborating with different conference superintendents in that area. In Florida, it's just all collapsed. There's just 1 bishop per annual conference, and they do administrative and spiritual work. In the TLC task force option, the roles of bishop and conference superintendent are defined separately. They're just 2 different jobs. In the Florida plan, there is no conference superintendent, so roles in the Florida petition read like a combination of bishop and conference superintendent roles from the TLC petition. So this is making clear this is very much like the United Methodist Church is set up. So with respect to the bishop elections. Let's see how detailed that gets. That's not too bad. Okay, I think we can cover this all right. So with respect, I'm just going to go all the way down on the left first. So here's the TLC plan. Annual conferences endorse candidates, one within and one from outside. I don't know if that's how it's happened so far. 2, General Commission on Episcopacy recommends the number of bishops to be elected. Okay, so this is, okay, right now we've just had an ad hoc system where we've got to start off somewhere. But going forward, this is the system that would be adopted because we don't have a committee or a commission on episcopacy yet. So they will recommend the number of bishops to be elected. So I think what I read was 1.5 times the number needed, and then they'll select out of that pool. 3, General Committee on Episcopacy will develop a plan to identify bishop candidates for the whole church. So annual conferences have endorsed candidates, one within and one from outside. Okay, and then the General Commission on Episcopacy just deals with that pool. 4, General Commission on Episcopacy develops a vetted slate with 2 times the number needed. Excuse me, it wasn't 1.5, it's 2 times. 5, no nominations from the floor at General Conference. I don't know if I like that. 6, General Conference elects by a 60% plus 1 vote. I think you want bishops to have a little bit more of the body support than that. 7, General Commission on Episcopacy assigns bishops to an episcopal area. Okay, so they decide where the bishop will go. 8, a bishop will serve 6-year terms, no more than 2 in a row, but must be reelected at the next General Conference. I think that makes sense. And 9, interim vacancies filled by the General Commission on Episcopacy in consultation with the Association of Bishops. Interim vacancies filled by General Commission. Okay, so if somebody has to retire or step out, then it's filled by those parties. Okay, so that's how elections are going to be handled. Now, in the Florida plan, annual conferences nominate 2 from within who all go onto the ballot. Okay, so within would mean inside the so does one annual conference in the TLC plan have to nominate someone from outside of their conference? That's what it sounds like to me. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. That would be different. Well, I mean, I like that because then you have to keep your eye on people outside of your conference, which is good. That's how connectionalism works. But in the Florida plan, you just have to draw from your own pool. 2, General Conference elects no less than the number of annual conferences by 60% vote. Sorry, that's just not very clear to me. Is that, here, let's go on and maybe I'll come back. 3, each annual conference committee on episcopacy selects a bishop from the elected pool. 4, they serve 1 12-year term. Oh my gosh. 5, vacancies filled by the annual conference commission on episcopacy selecting a new bishop from the elected pool by 2/3 vote. Okay, and then 5, a temporary interim bishop can be filled by General Committee on Episcopacy selecting an interim bishop from the elected pool. Commission on Episcopacy must be approved by majority vote. So there's an annual conference commission on episcopacy, and then there's the General Conference. And annual conference handles the first step, General Conference the second step. Interesting plans. Okay, so coming back to this one that confused me. Each annual conference commission on episcopacy selects a bishop from the elected pool. So there's a pool. Sorry guys, I'm not smart enough to discern exactly how this one works. So I'm finding myself not able to speak very authoritatively on this. With respect to compensation, the TLC plan is bishops' compensation benefits are set by the General Commission on Episcopacy. Bishops are employed by the General Church. Both the U.S. and non-U.S. are paid by the General Church, and conference superintendents are paid by each annual conference, including U.S. and non-U.S. Okay, that's clear enough. So who's paying the bishops? The General Church. Who's paying the conference superintendents? The conference. So uh, those salary units would be set by the general church ones would be set by General Commission on Episcopacy, but then each annual conference would decide how much it's paying its conference superintendent. But there is no conference superintendent in the Florida plan, so they say bishops' compensation benefits are set by the General Commission on Episcopacy. Okay, that's the same. 2, bishops are employees of the annual conference, and so U.S. bishops are paid by the annual conference. Okay, so the rate is set by the General Commission, but then it's paid by the annual conference. That's interesting. 3, non-U.S. bishops paid for by the general church pass through money from a U.S. partner or annual conference, or if not enough, from the general church connectional funding. Okay, so each region outside of the U.S. will try and pay its own bishop, but if it can't cover the salary set by the General Commission on Episcopacy, then the general church will kick in the rest of the money that's needed, which is not a bad plan. And then 4, cost of travel outside of their episcopal area for both non-U.S. for both U.S. and non-U.S. bishops is paid by the general church, which is fine. So, I mean, in general, the TLC plan makes a little bit more sense to me, and I think the primary thing I like about it is you separate administrative and spiritual functions. Now, granted, there is no scripture to justify such a thing. It seems pretty clear that scripturally and historically in the early church, bishops were responsible for both the temporal and spiritual affairs of the church. So maybe the biblical case sits more firmly with Florida, but it seems to me that we can experiment in this way. And I would like to see what I think happened in the United Methodist Church is the temporal affairs of the church really swallowed whole what bishops were doing and compromised a lot of their time and energy and their viewpoint. And I think if we had people carrying authority who spent the vast majority of their time in spiritual matters, that there would be a lot more charismatic conduct, a lot more idealism, a lot more faithfulness, less institutionalism. So I'm inclined to give that one a shot. And I know that doesn't sound very responsible to give something a shot, but in my mind, it's just we need to learn the lessons that we should have from the United Methodist Church, and so we should not be reproducing something similar to what we had there. So perhaps Jay Therrell in Florida has presented his plan somewhere on video that I could review, and or maybe in writing, and he's surely anticipated a lot of these concerns that I have, and has an answer for them that I haven't anticipated. So we'll check that out.